At dinner, my mother-in-law casually suggested our son should cancel his birthday trip to Cedar Point, so his younger cousin could go instead. She smiled and said, "You are mature enough to understand. Do not be selfish." My son fell silent, staring down at his meal. The table turned tense. Then my husband slowly rose from his seat and said something that changed everything. The entire room went quiet. "My name is Nia, and I am 34 years old. I never expected my own mother-in-law to look my 10-year-old son in the eyes and demand he hand over his birthday present to his spoiled cousin. As the founder and chief executive officer of a luxury event management company, I have spent years building my business from the ground up. I work hard to secure a future for my family and to create the kind of generational wealth that my ancestors could only dream of. But to my husband's family, my success was never something to celebrate. It was just an endless source of resentment. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit the like button and subscribe if you have ever had to protect your child from the toxicity of your own relatives. You will definitely want to hear how we handled this situation. Growing up, I was taught that family is supposed to be your safe haven. But marrying into Marcus' family taught me that blood does not always mean loyalty. Marcus is a 35-year-old corporate lawyer for a massive financial firm. He is brilliant, calm, and fiercely protective of us. Unfortunately, he was born to Beatrice. Beatrice is a 62-year-old woman who cares more about country club appearances and high society status than genuine human connection. Every Sunday, we were expected to gather at Beatrice in her sprawling brick house in the suburbs. It was a mandatory tradition she guarded fiercely. You would think these Sunday dinners were about family bonding and sharing a warm meal. In reality, they were just a stage for Beatrice to showcase her blatant favoritism. Her absolute pride and joy was my sister-in-law, Chloe. Chloe is 32 and firmly believes the world owes her a luxury lifestyle just for existing. She is married to Trent, a 34-year-old white man who works in middle management but constantly acts like he is the mastermind of Wall Street. Last Sunday, the atmosphere was even more suffocating than usual. I had spent hours that morning carefully baking a peach cobbler from scratch. It was a cherished recipe passed down from my grandmother, and I brought it as an olive branch. When I set it on the gleaming granite counter, Chloe did not even bother to look up from her phone. She simply wrinkled her nose, tapped her perfectly manicured nails against the marble island, and muttered that carbs were ruining her diet. She loudly questioned why I did not just buy the vegan fruit tart from the expensive organic bakery downtown instead of bringing homemade junk. I just smiled politely, poured myself a glass of iced tea, and walked away. I was exhausted by her constant need to belittle my efforts. When it was time to eat, we all took our assigned seats at the heavy oak dining table. Trent was sitting directly across from me, chewing his steak so loudly I could hear it over the smooth jazz music playing softly from the ceiling speakers. Between loud, obnoxious bites, he was bragging endlessly about his latest stock market investments. He threw around financial jargon he clearly barely understood, just to sound wealthy and important. Marcus knows more about corporate financial regulations than Trent could ever comprehend in a lifetime. But Marcus just sat there quietly cutting his food and letting Trent make a complete fool of himself. Next to Trent sat his 8-year-old son, Braden. Braden was currently using his silver fork to catapult green peas across the pristine white tablecloth. Chloe ignored her son's terrible behavior entirely. She was too busy taking pictures of her wine glass from different angles to post on social media. My son Malik sat quietly beside me with his hands folded in his lap. Malik is 10 and the sweetest, most well-behaved boy you could ever meet. He works so hard in school and gets straight A grades. Because of his hard work, we promised him a spectacular 10th birthday trip to Cedar Point. We did not just get regular admission. I used my industry connections to secure an exclusive VIP cabana package. It meant luxury seating, private catering, and skipping the lines for every single roller coaster. Malik had been counting down the days for 6 months. The dinner was dragging on painfully when Beatrice suddenly picked up her heavy silver spoon. She tapped it sharply against the side of her crystal wine glass. The sharp clinking sound cut right through Trent and his loud bragging. The entire table stopped and looked at her. Beatrice cleared her throat and wiped the corners of her mouth with a cloth napkin. She put on this incredibly fake, sweet smile that did not reach her eyes. She looked directly at my son. Malik, sweetheart. She started, her voice dripping with artificial warmth. I was talking to your Aunt Chloe earlier today and we were discussing your upcoming birthday trip to Cedar Point. Malik beamed instantly. His face lit up with pure, innocent excitement. Yes, Grandma, he said happily. Mom and Dad are taking me to the VIP cabanas. We get to skip all the long lines for the big roller coasters. Beatrice kept that plastic smile plastered on her face, but her tone grew cold and calculating. Yes, well about that, she said smoothly, waving her hand in the air. You know your little cousin Braden has been having a really hard time at school lately. The teachers simply do not understand his creative energy, and he has been under so much terrible stress. Aunt Chloe and Uncle Trent have been very worried about his emotional health. I felt a tight knot form deep in my stomach. I glanced sideways at Marcus and saw a muscle feathering in his jaw. I knew exactly where this manipulative speech was heading, but I prayed she was not actually cruel enough to say it out loud to a child. I was wrong. She was absolutely that cruel. Beatrice leaned forward, placing her elbows on the table. So since you are 10 now, Malik, you are growing into such a mature and capable young man. You are much older and stronger than little Braden. I think it would be a wonderful gesture of family solidarity if you gave your VIP Cedar Point tickets to Braden instead. You can always go to a local public park for your birthday. You are mature enough to understand, Malik. Do not be selfish. We have to take care of family first, and Braden needs this trip more than you do. The sheer audacity of her words hung in the air like toxic smoke. She did not speak to me privately. She did not ask Marcus for permission. She deliberately cornered a 10-year-old boy in front of the entire family. She demanded he hand over his dream birthday present to a spoiled child who threw violent tantrums when his tablet battery died. I slowly turned my head to look at my son. The bright light completely vanished from Malik and his eyes. His joyful smile collapsed into a look of absolute crushing devastation. He looked down at his half-eaten plate. His small shoulders slumped forward in defeat. A single heavy tear escaped his eye and fell silently onto his food. He did not say a single word of protest because Beatrice had spent years conditioning him to believe that standing up for himself was a sign of disrespect. My blood boiled hot in my veins. The fierce protective instinct inside me flared up so violently, I could actually hear my own heartbeat thumping loudly in my ears. I opened my mouth ready to verbally tear Beatrice apart and drag her for her blatant favoritism, but I did not even get the chance to speak. Beside me, Marcus stopped cutting his steak. He slowly placed his heavy silver fork down onto the porcelain dinner plate. The sharp metallic clink sounded exactly like a gunshot echoing through the suddenly silent dining room. He did not yell or raise his voice. He did not slam his fists on the heavy oak table. But the temperature in the room seemed to plummet to freezing in a matter of seconds. Marcus slowly lifted his head. His dark eyes locked onto his mother with a chilling, terrifying intensity that made even Trent stop his obnoxious chewing. Marcus slowly rose from his seat, towering over the dinner table, like a judge ready to hand down a sentence. What did you just say to my son? Beatrice gasped dramatically, placing her hand over her chest, as if Marcus had just physically struck her. She looked around the table, seeking an audience for her sudden victimhood. Her eyes widened, and she let out a sharp, offended breath. Marcus, I am your mother, she said, her voice trembling with manufactured hurt. Do not use that aggressive tone with me in my own dining room. I am simply trying to find a fair compromise for the children. You always overreact whenever I try to bring this family together. It breaks my heart to see how hard and cold you have become. Marcus did not blink. His posture remained rigid, and his dark eyes were locked onto her with unwavering intensity. There is no compromise when it comes to stealing my son's birthday present to appease your favorites, he replied, his voice low and dangerous. Beatrice immediately deployed her favorite weapon, which was guilt. She sniffled and dabbed at her dry eyes with her heavy cloth napkin. "This is exactly what I mean," she wailed, looking at the ceiling as if asking the heavens for strength. "Ever since you married Nia, you have completely alienated yourself from your real family. You sit in your fancy corporate office making all that money, and you forget the people who raised you. You forget your own sister. Chloe is struggling, and Brayden is suffering, but you only care about your perfect little bubble. You think you are better than us now. You have forgotten what it means to be part of a village." I watched Beatrice spin her web of manipulation with a sick sense of familiarity. It was a masterclass in psychological abuse and gaslighting. She was actively harming her grandson, breaking a 10-year-old boy's heart right at the dinner table, but somehow she was twisting the narrative so she looked like the wounded matriarch. She was taking the beautiful cultural concept of "it takes a village" and weaponizing it to justify blatant theft. In her mind, my success and Marcus' success meant we owed them our constant sacrifice. We were supposed to shrink ourselves and our child to make her golden child feel bigger. Chloe could not miss an opportunity to jump into the spotlight and defend her mother. She set her phone face down on the table and crossed her arms over her chest. Her eyes darted toward me, filled with a toxic mixture of jealousy and spite. She leaned forward, her lips curled into a vicious sneer. "Mom is right, Marcus." Chloe snapped, her voice shrill and grating. "You two are raising Malik to be completely entitled. He needs to learn that the world does not revolve around him. And Naya, let us be honest here since we are airing things out. You only bought those VIP tickets because you feel guilty." I slowly turned my attention to my sister-in-law. "Excuse me," I said, my voice perfectly level. Chloe smirked, leaning back in her chair like she had just uncovered my deepest, darkest secret. "Oh, please, Nia," she scoffed, rolling her eyes exaggeratedly. "We all know you are obsessed with your luxury event management company. You are always flying off to conferences or glued to your laptop negotiating contracts with high-profile clients. You are never actually present for your husband or your son. You just throw money at Malik to make up for the fact that you do not know how to be a real mother. You buy him VIP experiences, so you do not have to put in the actual emotional work of parenting. Why do you not learn how to be a devoted, stay-at-home mother like me? It takes real sacrifice to raise a child right." I stared at Chloe, letting her incredibly ignorant words hang in the heavy air of the dining room. The sheer projection was almost hilarious, but the malice behind it was undeniable. Chloe had a full-time nanny named Maria who basically raised Brayden from birth. Chloe spent her days at the Pilates studio browsing luxury boutiques and curating her fake aesthetic on social media. She did not even know the name of Brayden's homeroom teacher or what he was allergic to. Meanwhile, I made it a point to be at every single one of Malik's soccer games, every parent-teacher conference, and every bedtime reading session. I built my business specifically so I could dictate my own schedule and be fiercely present for my son. I was breaking generational curses and building an empire so my child would never have to beg for a seat at the table. But Chloe needed to believe I was a negligent mother to make herself feel better about her own empty, unproductive life. She hated my independence, and she despised the fact that I did not need her mother's financial approval. I did not scream. I did not throw my glass of iced tea in her face, though the temptation was certainly there. I simply smiled, a cold, calculated smile that made Chloe shift uncomfortably in her seat. "Chloe," I said, speaking slowly and clearly so she could absorb every single syllable. "I provide for my son using the money I earn from a business I built with my own two hands. I pay for my own lifestyle. I do not rely on credit cards that my mother pays off in secret when I max them out on designer bags. And I certainly do not rely on emotionally blackmailing a 10-year-old boy to give my child a vacation I cannot afford." Chloe's jaw dropped open. A flash of genuine panic crossed her face before she quickly masked it with loud, sputtering outrage. "How dare you?" she gasped, looking frantically at Beatrice for backup. "Mom, did you hear what she just said to me?" Before Chloe could formulate a proper response or start crying to gain more sympathy, Trent decided it was his time to play the hero. He loudly cleared his throat and puffed out his chest, adjusting the collar of his expensive-looking but clearly off-the-rack dress shirt. He looked at me and Marcus with an expression of supreme arrogance that only a mediocre man could muster. "All right, that is enough," Trent announced using his loud, booming voice that he probably used to intimidate his junior staff at the office. "You people are making a massive deal out of absolutely nothing. You are ruining a perfectly good Sunday dinner over a theme park. It is just roller coasters and cotton candy, for crying out loud." Trent reached into the inner pocket of his blazer and pulled out a thick designer leather wallet. He flipped it open with an exaggerated flick of his wrist, making sure everyone at the table was watching his grand display of wealth. He pulled out 3 crisp $100 bills. He leaned across the heavy oak table and slammed the cash down onto the wood right next to Marcus' dinner plate. The bills sat there looking pathetic against the expensive porcelain. "There," Trent said, gesturing to the $300 with a smug, self-satisfied grin. "I will buy the tickets from you. Full price, right there in cash. Now nobody has to cry about it, and Malik can go buy himself a nice video game instead." "Stop making a big deal out of it, Marcus. Hand over the digital code, and we can go back to eating our steaks like civilized adults." I stared down at the 3 crisp $100 bills resting next to my husband's porcelain dinner plate. The green paper looked so incredibly small and insignificant lying there. Trent was leaning back in his heavy wooden chair now, with his arms crossed tightly behind his head, looking incredibly pleased with himself. He honestly believed he had just made a grand, sweeping gesture. He thought he was the ultimate patriarch stepping in to solve a petty family squabble with his superior financial power and unquestionable logic. I felt a slow, faint smile begin to form on my lips. It was not a smile of amusement. It was the kind of smile a predator gets right before it traps its prey. Trent had absolutely no idea what he was talking about. He assumed that because he took his own family to the local county fair for $100 last summer, that a VIP cabana package at one of the premier amusement parks in the country cost the exact same amount. The reality was that the exclusive package I secured for Malik cost well over $3,000. And that base price did not even include the private catered meals, the fast lane passes for every single roller coaster, and the dedicated concierge service I had personally arranged through my company contacts. $300 would not even cover the required security deposit for the cabana rental alone. But I did not say that out loud, not yet. I just sat there looking up at him from across the table, letting my silence stretch out, making the room feel heavy and profoundly uncomfortable. Trent completely mistook my silence for submission. He took a long, arrogant sip of his red wine, swirling it around in his glass, like he was a seasoned sommelier instead of a guy who bought his wine on discount at the local grocery store. He set the glass down heavily and turned his attention entirely to my husband. "You see, Marcus? This is exactly what I am talking about," Trent began, his tone dropping into that condescending middle management cadence he loved to use at family gatherings. "You and Nia need to understand the fundamental concepts of smart spending. You guys make a decent income, sure, but you are throwing it away on fleeting temporary experiences. A roller coaster ride is a depreciating asset. It holds absolutely no long-term value for your portfolio. You need to think about your return on investment. If you took that $300 and put it into a high-yield index fund, like I do with my quarterly bonuses, you would see actual substantial growth. You have to prioritize fiscal responsibility over indulging a child's every passing whim. That is how you build real wealth, Marcus. You have to look at the macroeconomics of your household. That is how you become a true provider for your family." I watched Trent run his mouth using corporate buzzwords he probably read in a free airport business magazine. It was a staggering display of Caucasian audacity. He was sitting in a dining room paid for by his mother-in-law, lecturing a top-tier corporate lawyer about fiscal responsibility. Marcus negotiates multi-million-dollar corporate mergers before his morning coffee. He understands tax law and asset management on a level that would make Trent's head spin. Trent manages a small team of customer service representatives at a regional supply chain office. Yet here was Trent openly mansplaining wealth accumulation to a black man who had literally built himself up from absolutely nothing to the very top of his highly competitive field. Chloe was nodding eagerly along to her husband's ridiculous speech, her eyes practically shining with pride. "See, Nia?" she chimed in, taking a delicate bite of her organic salad. "Trent is just looking out for your financial future. You should really be thanking him for bailing you out of this awkward situation. Now Malik can get a nice educational toy, and Brayden can go to the park to relieve his stress. It is a win for everyone. We are just trying to help you optimize your resources so you do not end up bankrupt from buying unnecessary luxury items to show off to your friends." Beatrice smiled warmly at her son-in-law, completely ignoring the tension radiating from my side of the table. "Thank you, Trent," she said softly, placing her hand over her heart in a dramatic show of deep gratitude. "It is so wonderful to have a real man in the family who knows how to take charge and make logical financial decisions without getting overly emotional about things." The sheer disrespect from all three of them was staggering. They were systematically trying to erase our success, minimize our intelligence, and steal from our child, all under the guise of doing us a generous favor. They wanted us to bow our heads, take their measly $300, and thank them for the rare privilege of being robbed. They needed to believe they were financially superior because accepting the truth that Marcus and I were light years ahead of them in every possible metric would completely shatter their fragile egos. My husband sat perfectly still. Marcus did not reach for the crumpled money. He did not flinch. He did not even break eye contact with Trent. He just let the silence stretch out again, allowing Trent's hollow, arrogant words to echo and die in the large dining room. Marcus knew me well enough to know that I did not need him to fight this particular battle for me. He was simply waiting for me to drop the hammer. He knew the exact monetary value of those tickets, and he knew exactly what I was capable of when my child was threatened by these people. I slowly picked up my glass of iced tea, taking a deliberate sip to wet my throat. The ice clinked softly against the expensive crystal. I placed the drink back down on the coaster, aligning it perfectly with the edge of my woven placemat. I looked Trent dead in the eyes, my faint smile hardening into a mask of pure, absolute authority. I was ready to educate this mediocre man. I was ready to explain to him exactly how much that VIP package cost. I was going to break down the pricing item by item until he realized just how pathetic and insulting his three bills looked sitting on that mahogany table. I was going to watch his smug, confident expression crumble into deep embarrassment. I opened my mouth, taking a slow, deep breath to deliver the verbal takedown he so desperately deserved. But before the first syllable could leave my lips, a small, quiet voice broke the heavy tension in the room. It was Malik. He was still looking down at his plate, his small hands gripping the edges of the white tablecloth tightly. He sounded terribly confused and incredibly sad. "But Mom," Malik said, his voice trembling slightly as he looked up at me with wide, innocent eyes. "Grandma said she already took the ticket code from your phone and sent it to Uncle Trent." For a split second, the entire dining room seemed to tilt on its axis. The smooth jazz playing from the ceiling speakers faded into a distant, muffled hum. I stared down at my sweet, innocent son, trying to process the words that had just left his mouth. The background of the room seemed to stretch and drift away, leaving only the sharp, crushing reality of what had just occurred. My own mother-in-law had not just made a rude suggestion at the dinner table. She had actively gone into my personal belongings behind my back. I looked at Malik, whose large brown eyes were welling up with tears. He was old enough to understand exactly what was happening. He realized that his own grandmother, the woman who was supposed to love and protect him, had deliberately sneaked behind his mother's back to steal his birthday present and give it to his cousin. The betrayal on his small face was absolutely heartbreaking to witness. It was a loss of innocence that I could never give back to him. I did not say a word immediately. I simply reached into my leather handbag, resting on the empty chair beside me. I pulled out my smartphone and stared at the blank screen for a moment. My mind was racing, connecting the dots of the evening's timeline. My fingers flew across the glass, opening my email application. I clicked directly on the sent folder. There it was, sitting right at the very top of the screen, like a glowing neon sign of betrayal. At exactly 6:15 that evening, a forwarded email was sent from my personal account directly to Trent's email address. The subject line read, VIP Cabana, Cedar Point All Access. 6:15 was the exact moment I was standing in the kitchen, taking my grandmother's peach cobbler out of the oven. I had left my purse on the console table in the hallway for just 5 minutes. I trusted the people in this house. That was my first mistake. That was all the time Beatrice needed to violate my privacy, dig through my bag, unlock my phone, and steal from her own grandson. I slowly locked my phone screen and placed the device face down on the heavy oak table. The initial shock evaporated completely entirely, replaced by a cold, hard, and absolute fury. I lifted my gaze and locked eyes with Beatrice. She was sitting at the head of the table, sipping her wine and looking completely unbothered. She did not look like a woman who had just been caught committing a crime. She looked like a woman who believed she was entirely above the law. "You went into my purse?" I stated, my voice eerily calm and devoid of any emotion. "You took my phone, unlocked it with the passcode you saw me use earlier, and you forwarded my digital property to your son-in-law." The entire table went dead silent again. Beside me, I could feel the heat radiating off Marcus. As a corporate lawyer, Marcus deals with fraud and theft on a massive scale every single day. Seeing it happen in his childhood home, committed by his own mother against his wife and child, pushed him entirely over the edge. I placed a gentle hand on Marcus' knee beneath the table, silently telling him to let me handle this. I wanted to see exactly how far Beatrice was willing to take this charade. Beatrice did not gasp or feign innocence this time. The sweet grandmother facade completely melted away, revealing the bitter, entitled woman underneath. She simply rolled her eyes and waved her manicured hand in the air like she was swatting away an annoying fly. "Oh, please, Nia, do not be so incredibly dramatic," Beatrice scoffed, taking another sip of her expensive red wine. "I did not steal anything. I simply borrowed the codes temporarily to secure the reservation for Braden before the park sold out. I knew you would overreact and make a huge scene out of nothing, so I streamlined the process to avoid unnecessary conflict at the dinner table. We are family, for heaven's sake. You and Marcus are rich beyond measure. You run a massive media company and make more money in a single month than most people make in an entire year. What is a few theme park tickets to you anyway? You can easily buy another set for Malik next week." It was a staggering display of mental gymnastics. She had literally committed digital theft, but in her twisted mind, I was the villain for being upset about it. She weaponized the concept of family to justify her own toxic behavior. She believed my financial success gave her the absolute right to distribute my assets however she saw fit. She felt entitled to the fruits of my labor because I had the audacity to marry her son and become successful. Chloe immediately chimed in to support her mother, leaning across the table with a deeply unpleasant look on her face. "Exactly," Chloe said, crossing her arms defiantly. "Mom was just doing what was best for the family as a whole. Braden needs this experience for his emotional well-being much more than Malik does. Malik is fine. He is always fine. You should be happy that your wealth can benefit the people you supposedly love instead of hoarding it all for yourself. Honestly, Nia, it is incredibly selfish of you to sit there and interrogate Mom over something so trivial. She is the matriarch of this family, and she makes the decisions on how we support each other. We are supposed to share our blessings." I looked at Chloe, then at Beatrice, and finally at Trent. They were a unified front of pure, unadulterated entitlement. They honestly thought they had won. They thought that because Beatrice had physically transferred the digital code, they had successfully hijacked my son's birthday present. They thought the crumpled $300 sitting on the table somehow legally absolved them of grand larceny. They believed they could just bully me into accepting this massive violation of boundaries because that is what they had always done to Marcus in the past. They were so blinded by their own jealousy and greed that they forgot exactly who they were dealing with. I do not just plan luxury events for a living. I control the entire infrastructure behind them. I am the person the venues call when they want to organize their exclusive VIP systems. I am the one who writes the contracts that dictate how those digital tickets operate. But Trent did not know that. Trent just thought he had outsmarted a black woman because his mother-in-law handed him a stolen prize. Trent let out a loud, arrogant laugh, breaking the heavy tension in the room. He picked up his smartphone from the table and leaned back in his chair, looking at me with pure, smug satisfaction. He thought he was completely untouchable. He tapped his screen a few times, navigating through his applications with annoying, deliberate slowness. Then he held the phone up high for everyone at the table to see. Bright and clear on his digital display was the square black and white QR code resting safely inside his Apple Wallet application. "Too late, sis," Trent sneered, his voice dripping with absolute condescension. "The transfer is already complete, and the tickets are officially registered in my device. You can take your little attitude and go complain to someone who actually cares. Thanks for the birthday gift." They were all waiting for the explosion. The silence in the dining room stretched out heavy and suffocating like the calm before a devastating hurricane. Beatrice leaned back in her chair with a look of smug satisfaction, expecting me to start screaming. Chloe had a triumphant smirk plastered across her face, her fingers drumming lightly against the edge of the table. They wanted me to lose my temper. They desperately wanted me to conform to their twisted narrative of the angry, unreasonable daughter-in-law. If I yelled, they could play the victims. If I flipped the heavy oak table or demanded the phone back, they could call me unstable and dramatic. They had set a trap, hoping my emotional reaction would justify their blatant theft. But I did not give them what they wanted. I did not scream. I did not raise my voice a single decibel. I did not even reach across the table to snatch the phone from Trent's arrogant hand. Instead, I let out a laugh. It started low in my chest, a quiet vibration that quickly bubbled up into a clear, echoing sound. It was not a forced chuckle or a nervous giggle. It was a genuine, deeply amused laugh that bounced off the expensive artwork and the crystal chandelier hanging above us. The sound of my laughter completely shattered the heavy tension they had worked so hard to build. It filled the entire dining room, sending a visible ripple of shock across the table. Trent stopped smiling immediately. His smug expression faltered, replaced by a look of deep confusion and sudden creeping unease. He lowered his phone slightly, staring at me as if I had just grown a second head. Chloe pulled her hand away from the table, looking at me with wide, uncertain eyes. Even Beatrice lowered her wine glass, her fake matriarchal confidence cracking just a fraction. They had prepared for my rage, but they were entirely unprepared for my absolute amusement. Beside me, I felt Marcus relax. The rigid tension in his broad shoulders completely melted away, and I saw the faint outline of a proud smirk touch the corners of his mouth. He knew exactly what was happening. He knew I had the upper hand, and he was more than happy to sit back and watch me dismantle his toxic relatives piece by piece. I glanced down at my son Malik, giving him a quick, reassuring wink. He wiped the single tear from his cheek and sat up a little straighter, sensing the shift in the room. I took my time. I reached out and wrapped my fingers around the delicate stem of my wine glass. I lifted it to my lips, taking a slow, deliberate sip of the rich red Cabernet. I let the liquid coat my throat, enjoying the taste, before setting the glass back down on the woven placemat with a soft, controlled clink. I leaned back into the plush upholstery of my dining chair, crossing my legs and resting my hands elegantly on my lap. I looked like a chief executive officer sitting at the head of a boardroom looking down at a junior employee who had just spectacularly failed a presentation. "Trent, I said, my voice perfectly smooth and conversational. You work in human resources, right? You spend your entire day reviewing resumes, reading corporate policies, and evaluating employee reading comprehension. Trent puffed out his chest instinctively, trying to defend his mediocre career. I am a senior manager, he corrected, his voice defensive and tight. I oversee an entire department, Nia. What does my career have to do with the fact that I just secured my son's birthday trip? You are just trying to change the subject because you know you have lost this battle? I smiled, shaking my head slowly in mock pity. Because, Trent, if your reading comprehension was functioning at even a middle school level, you would have noticed something very specific about that digital pass you just stole. You see, when you forwarded that email, you were so blinded by your own greed and your desperate need to feel like a big man that you did not actually read the fine print. You did not look at the watermarks. Did you not see the corporate logo attached to the top of the digital ticket? Trent frowned deeply. He quickly looked down at his phone screen, his thumb hovering over the display. What logo? He muttered, tracing his eyes over the screen. It is a barcode. A barcode is a barcode. You scan it at the gate and you walk in. Do not try to confuse the issue just because you are mad. Oh, Trent. I laughed softly, the sound carrying a razor-sharp edge. I have not lost anything. You really have no idea how the luxury hospitality industry works, do you? You think a highly exclusive VIP cabana package is just a generic barcode you can pass around like a digital coupon for a free coffee. That ticket is tied to a secure central database. It requires matching government-issued identification, facial recognition registration at the concierge desk, and a direct verification from the issuing agency. Chloe scoffed, rolling her eyes, though her voice lacked its earlier confidence. She is just bluffing, Trent. She is trying to scare you into giving it back. Just ignore her. She is just mad that Mom outsmarted her. I am not bluffing, Chloe, I replied, leaning forward slightly, resting my elbows on the heavy oak table. My eyes locked onto Trent's phone, and I definitely do not want it back. Because that specific digital ticket is not a general admission pass. It is a corporate guest pass issued directly by my company, my luxury event management company. The logo sitting right above that QR code is my business logo. The dining room fell so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Trent stared at me, his face slowly draining of all its color. The arrogant sneer was completely eradicated, replaced by a rigid mask of sudden absolute panic. He looked down at the screen again, squinting at the small stylized graphic located at the top of the digital wallet pass. He had been so eager to steal the barcode that he had completely ignored the branding surrounding it. Beatrice cleared her throat nervously, shifting in her seat. Her eyes darted frantically between me and Trent. Well, what does that mean? She asked, her voice losing all of its demanding entitled edge. It is still a valid ticket. We have it now in Trent's phone. The digital transfer is complete. You cannot just undo it. I reached out and picked up my smartphone from the table. The screen illuminated, casting a soft glow on my face. I did not open my email application this time. I opened my proprietary corporate management system. It is the highly secure software my team uses to monitor our high-profile guests, control access to exclusive events, and manage millions of dollars in hospitality assets. It gives me absolute administrative control over every single digital ticket my company issues. It means, Beatrice, I said, my voice dropping to a low, icy whisper that commanded the attention of everyone in the room, that Trent does not hold a ticket. He holds a digital tracking beacon that I entirely control. He is holding a pass that is completely reliant on my administrative approval to function. And since you all decided to play dirty and steal from a 10-year-old boy, I am going to show you exactly what happens when you try to cross the person who literally owns the system. I tapped the screen of my phone, navigating effortlessly through the administrative dashboard. I brought up the active guest list for the Cedar Point VIP Cabana experience. Right there at the top of the list was the pass registered to my son, Malik. Next to it was a flashing security notification showing the unauthorized IP address transfer to Trent's device. The system algorithms had already flagged the sudden movement as a potential anomaly. All it needed was my final executive command to execute a security protocol. I did not even look at Trent as I made my final move. I kept my eyes locked directly on Beatrice, forcing her to watch as I effortlessly dismantled her little scheme with the tip of my finger. I wanted her to see exactly how powerless she truly was in the face of my hard-earned authority. I tapped a single red button on my screen. Instantly, a loud, sharp beep echoed from Trent's hand. Everyone at the table jumped. Trent practically dropped his expensive device. He fumbled to catch it, his eyes wide with shock. He stared down at his screen, his mouth hanging slightly open. The bright square QR code that he had been so proudly displaying just seconds ago was completely gone. In its place, the entire screen had turned a harsh, glaring bright red. Right in the centers of the display, replacing the ticket information in bold white capital letters, flashed a message that Trent could not ignore. Cancelled, due to suspected fraud. Trent stared down at the glaring red screen of his phone as if it had just physically burned his hand. His thumb frantically tapped the digital display, desperately trying to swipe away the warning message. He closed the application and reopened it. He refreshed his digital wallet over and over again, but the result was exactly the same every single time. The bright red screen remained locked in place, and the bold white letters spelling out "cancelled due to suspected fraud" seemed to mock him. I sat perfectly still, leaning back comfortably against the soft upholstery of my dining chair. I rested my right hand on the arm of the chair and let my index finger tap rhythmically against the polished mahogany wood. The quiet, deliberate tapping sound echoed in the sudden dead silence of the room. It sounded exactly like a ticking countdown clock. I watched the blood completely drain from Trent's face. The smug, arrogant mask of the wealthy provider had shattered into a million pieces, revealing the terrified, insecure man hiding underneath. "What is this?" Trent demanded, his voice cracking slightly as he shoved the phone screen in my direction. "What kind of petty childish trick did you just pull, Nia? Undo it right now. I paid you $300 for this transfer. You cannot just lock me out of my own property." I slowly stopped tapping my finger. I looked at him with an expression of pure, unadulterated pity. "Trent," I said softly, "you cannot buy something that was never for sale. And you certainly cannot claim ownership of a digital asset that belongs to a multi-million-dollar corporate entity." Beatrice leaned forward, her hands gripping the edge of the table so tightly her knuckles turned white. "Nia, whatever silly little tech trick you are doing, you need to stop it right this instant," she commanded, trying to summon her usual matriarchal authority. "You are embarrassing your brother-in-law for no reason. Fix his phone so we can finish our dinner in peace. You are taking this joke entirely too far." "It is not a joke, Beatrice," I replied, my voice sharp and cutting. "It is a corporate security protocol, and I highly suggest you all listen to me very carefully right now, because you clearly have absolutely no idea what you just stumbled into." Chloe let out a nervous, shaky laugh. "What are you even talking about, Nia?" she scoffed, crossing her arms defensively. "You plan parties for a living. You order balloons and catering. Stop acting like you work for the Secret Service. You are just throwing a tantrum because Mom outsmarted you. Give Trent the real code." I turned my gaze to Chloe, letting the sheer ignorance of her statement hang in the air for a moment. "I do not order balloons, Chloe," I stated clearly and evenly. "I am the founder and chief executive officer of a premier luxury event management and media firm. My company does not just throw parties. We build entire hospitality infrastructures for high-net-worth clients and major entertainment venues across the country." I looked back at Trent, ensuring he maintained eye contact with me as I delivered the reality check he so desperately needed. "Those VIP cabana tickets you thought you could just steal from my purse were not purchased on some public discount website. I did not log onto the internet and type in my credit card number to buy them. I did not pay a single dime for those passes." Trent frowned deeply, his brow furrowing in confusion. If you did not buy them, then how did you get them? He asked, his voice laced with suspicion. Because I own them, I said simply. Last month, my media company signed a $5 million strategic partnership contract with the corporate entertainment group that owns Cedar Point. My firm was hired to completely redesign, upgrade, and manage their entire VIP cabana system for the upcoming summer season. We control the luxury catering contracts. We manage the private security details. And most importantly, we built the proprietary software that issues and verifies every single VIP access pass for the entire park. The dining room went completely still. Even Trent stopped fiddling with his phone. His jaw slacked slightly as the magnitude of my words finally began to penetrate his thick skull. As the lead strategic partner, I receive complimentary executive access passes. I continued explaining the situation with the calm, detached tone of a teacher lecturing a very slow student. Those passes are directly linked to my personal corporate administrative account. They are not transferable without my direct dual-factor authentication approval. When Beatrice stole my phone and forwarded that email, the system immediately logged the unauthorized IP address transfer. It flagged the movement as an anomaly. But it did not cancel the ticket until I manually confirmed the theft from my master dashboard. I paused, letting the heavy silence stretch out for a few seconds. I watched the realization wash over Beatrice. Her face turned a sickly shade of gray. She suddenly realized that she had not just committed a petty family grievance. She had actively tampered with corporate assets tied to a $5 million partnership. Trent, I said, my voice dropping to a low, serious register. I just officially reported that specific QR code as stolen property in the Central Security Database. That barcode is now digitally flagged across the entire Cedar Point security network. Do you understand what that actually means for you? Trent swallowed hard, but he stubbornly refused to answer. He just stared at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of panic and rising anger. It means that if you try to take Braden to that theme park next week and you present that red screen to the ticketing agents, you will not just be turned away, I explained, methodically painting a very clear picture of his impending doom. The moment that flagged barcode is scanned by their system, it triggers a silent alarm directly to the park security office. They will immediately surround you. They will detain you in a holding room. And then they will call the local police department to arrest you for attempting to use stolen corporate property to commit fraud. Chloe gasped loudly, covering her mouth with her hands. Her eyes darted frantically toward her husband. Trent, tell her she is lying, Chloe pleaded, her voice trembling with genuine fear. Tell her she cannot do that to you. You are a senior manager. Tell her you will get her fired. I let out a short, bitter laugh. Fired, I repeated, shaking my head at her absolute delusion. Chloe, I own the company. I am the boss. There is no one above me to call. And frankly, your husband should be thanking me right now. By canceling that ticket from my phone, I just saved him from being handcuffed in front of his 8-year-old son at the entrance of an amusement park. The absolute humiliation of the situation finally broke Trent. His fragile ego, built entirely on a foundation of white male privilege and unearned arrogance, completely shattered into pieces. He could not handle the fact that a black woman was sitting across from him, calmly, systematically, and effortlessly destroying his illusion of power. He realized that his $300 meant absolutely nothing in the face of my actual generational wealth. He realized that he was completely outmatched in every possible way. The panic in his eyes instantly dissolved into a violent, explosive rage. Trent let out a loud, guttural yell. He violently pushed his heavy wooden chair back, causing the legs to screech horribly against the hardwood floor. He stood up so fast, he nearly knocked over his wine glass. He slammed both of his large hands down onto the dining table with such terrifying force that the heavy porcelain plates violently rattled and the silverware clattered against the crystal glasses. You lying, arrogant witch! Trent screamed, his face turning a blotchy shade of purple. The veins in his neck bulged against his tight shirt collar. You think you can just sit there and threaten me? You think because you have some fancy little contract you can treat my family like criminals? Marcus instantly shifted in his seat, his muscles tensing beneath his suit jacket. I put my hand up slightly, signaling my husband to stay seated. I was not afraid of Trent. A man who yells and slams tables is a man who has entirely lost control of the situation. You are a fraud, Nia Trent spat, pointing a shaking aggressive finger directly at my face. You are just making all of this up to humiliate me because you are jealous of my family. I am not going to let you get away with this. I am calling my lawyer first thing tomorrow morning. I am going to sue you for everything you are worth. I am going to drag your precious little company into court for defamation of character and intentional emotional distress. You are going to pay for threatening me, you hear me? You are going to pay. Trent stood there panting heavily, his chest heaving with misplaced outrage. He looked entirely ridiculous. He was a grown man throwing a violent temper tantrum simply because he was not allowed to keep something he had actively stolen. I did not flinch or blink at his loud, empty threats. I simply looked up at him with the exact same detached amusement I would offer a toddler screaming in the middle of a grocery store aisle. But Marcus had heard enough. My husband reached down and picked up his pristine white cloth napkin. He did not throw it in a fit of rage or slam it down to make a scene. He simply dropped it onto his porcelain dinner plate with a quiet, devastating finality. He pushed his heavy wooden chair back and stood up to his full height. Marcus is a tall, broad-shouldered man, easily a full head taller than Trent. But it was not just his physical height that made him so incredibly intimidating in that moment. It was the absolute terrifying stillness of his posture. He carried the commanding, unyielding presence of a man who routinely destroyed multi-million-dollar corporations in federal courtrooms before lunchtime. The moment Marcus stood up, the entire dynamic of the dining room shifted. Trent instantly took a small, unconscious step backward. His loud, aggressive energy evaporated, completely swallowed whole by the sheer gravity of my husband's cold anger. Defamation. Marcus repeated his voice dangerously low and remarkably smooth. That is a very interesting legal strategy, Trent. I highly encourage you to pursue it, because any first-year law student will gladly inform you that the absolute and ultimate defense against a defamation lawsuit is the truth. Marcus placed his large hands on the edge of the dining table, leaning forward slightly. His dark, unwavering eyes locked directly onto his brother-in-law. Let us review the concrete facts of what actually occurred in this dining room tonight. My wife did not defame your character. My wife simply informed you of the severe legal consequences of your own careless actions. You, on the other hand, have actively participated in a string of documented criminal offenses. Trent opened his mouth to argue, his face flushing a deeper shade of red, but Marcus cut him off with a single sharp look. Do not interrupt me, Marcus commanded with a voice that left absolutely no room for debate. Let us start with my mother. Beatrice committed unauthorized access to a protected digital device, which is a serious federal offense under the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. She then committed grand larceny by transferring a digital corporate asset valued at over $3,000 entirely without the consent of the rightful owner. Beatrice let out a loud, dramatic gasp, clutching the pearl necklace resting around her throat. Marcus, you cannot possibly be serious, she cried, her voice shaking with genuine terror and disbelief. I am your mother. I did not commit a federal offense. I am just an older woman who does not even understand how these complicated computer things work. You are twisting my intentions. Ignorance of the law is not a valid legal defense, Mother, Marcus replied, without even turning his head to look at her. You knew exactly what you were doing when you waited for Naya to leave the room. You knew exactly what you were doing when you went digging through her personal belongings. You violated the privacy of my wife in order to steal a gift from my 10-year-old son. You do not get to hide behind your age or your technological ignorance when your actions were entirely malicious and premeditated. You ceased acting like a mother the moment you decided my wife and child were acceptable collateral damage for your blatant favoritism. Beatrice shrank back into her chair, her mouth opening and closing silently. She had never been spoken to like that by her son. For years, Marcus had simply tolerated her toxic behavior for the sake of keeping the peace. But she had finally crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. Marcus turned his full attention back to Trent, who was now sweating profusely under his expensive dress shirt collar. "And then there is you, Trent." Marcus continued, his words slicing through the heavy air like a surgical scalpel. "You received stolen digital property, Lynn. That immediately makes you an accessory after the fact. But it gets much worse for you, legally speaking. When Naya explicitly informed you that the asset was stolen, you did not immediately surrender it. You did not apologize for the misunderstanding. Instead, you proudly claimed ownership of the stolen property and attempted to intimidate her into relinquishing her corporate security rights. That elevates your involvement from simple possession of stolen goods to active extortion." Trent swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously in his throat. He looked frantically at the front door, as if calculating exactly how fast he could run out of the house. "I was just trying to pay for it." Trent mumbled, his voice completely losing its previous booming corporate volume. "I put $300 right there on the table. It was a business transaction." Marcus let out a short, humorless laugh. "Leaving $300 on a dining table after committing digital theft does not make it a business transaction, Trent. It just makes you a thief who leaves incredibly insulting tips." I sat quietly watching my husband absolutely dismantle this arrogant man, and I felt a deep, profound sense of pride wash over me. This is exactly what a real partnership looks like. Marcus did not need to step in, because I was weak or incapable of defending myself. I was fully prepared to destroy Trent on my own. Marcus stepped in because no one disrespects his wife and child in his presence, and walks away unscathed. He was the solid fortress protecting our family from the toxic radiation of his own blood relatives. I looked down at Malik, who was watching his father with wide, admiring eyes. The fear and sadness had vanished from my son's face, replaced by the comforting realization that his parents would always fight for him. "If you want to call a lawyer tomorrow morning, Trent, I highly suggest you make sure he specializes in criminal defense," Marcus stated, standing completely straight and casually adjusting the cuffs of his suit jacket. "Because if you ever raise your voice at my wife again, I will personally draft the police report. I will hand over the system security logs from her company outlining exactly when and how the digital transfer occurred. I will bury you in so much litigation that you will be spending the next decade of your miserable life paying legal fees instead of paying rent. Sit down and keep your mouth shut before I decide to make an example out of you." The absolute finality in Marcus' voice echoed heavily in the silent room. He had completely stripped Trent of his fake authority, his unearned arrogance, and his false sense of racial superiority. He had exposed him as nothing more than an ignorant petty thief, playing dress-up in a cheap suit. Trent did not say another word. He slowly sank back into his dining chair, looking completely defeated and utterly humiliated. He stared down at his half-eaten steak, unable to make eye contact with anyone in the room. His grand display of power had ended in absolute devastating disaster. But Chloe could not accept this reality. She had spent her entire adult life believing she was the golden child who deserved everything she wanted. She had built her entire fragile identity around being married to a successful, wealthy provider. Seeing her husband publicly emasculated and threatened with criminal charges completely broke her grip on reality. She could not process the fact that the people she constantly looked down upon were the ones holding all the power. Chloe suddenly sprang up from her chair, her face flushed with pure, unhinged fury. She slammed her perfectly manicured hands onto the table, knocking over a crystal water glass. The cold water spilled rapidly across the white tablecloth, soaking into the fabric, but she did not even notice. She glared at Marcus with a look of absolute blinding hatred. "How dare you threaten Trent?" Chloe screamed, her voice echoing shrilly against the dining room walls. "You think you are so smart with your stupid law degree and your fancy suits? Trent is a branch director. He is an incredibly important executive. He has enough money to crush your wife and her stupid little party planning company into the ground." Marcus did not flinch at her piercing screams. Instead, he let out a short, bitter laugh. It was a harsh sound entirely devoid of any real humor. He looked down at his younger sister with an expression of profound pity. Chloe had spent her entire adult life constructing a flawless image of herself as the wealthy suburban housewife, married to a high-powered executive. She wore her husband's supposed corporate title like a heavy golden shield, using it to justify her constant belittling of everyone else around her. She truly believed that Trent's imaginary success gave her the absolute right to look down on me and my hard-earned accomplishments. She had built a glass house on a foundation of total lies, and now she was throwing stones at the only people who actually knew the truth. Marcus slowly shook his head, his dark eyes locking onto his sister's flushed, angry face. "Branch director," he repeated the words, tasting sour on his tongue. "Is that what he tells you when he leaves the house every morning, Chloe? Does he tell you he is heading into the city to manage a team of important executives and close massive corporate deals?" Chloe lifted her chin defiantly, crossing her arms tight against her chest. "Yes," she snapped, her voice trembling with indignant rage. "Because that is exactly what he does. He is a senior manager at a top-tier tech logistics firm. He makes six figures. He just got a massive performance bonus last quarter. That is why we can afford to buy things with cash while you and your wife have to rely on cheap corporate handouts. He is a provider, Marcus. Something you clearly know nothing about since you let your wife work herself to the bone." The absolute delusion in her voice was almost tragic to witness. I sat quietly watching the exchange, feeling a strange mix of vindication and second-hand embarrassment. Chloe was fighting so fiercely to protect a version of her husband that simply did not exist. Marcus took a deep breath, casually adjusting the cuffs of his tailored suit jacket before delivering the final fatal blow to her carefully curated fantasy world. "Chloe, my firm handles corporate litigation and restructuring for over 50 major companies in this state." Marcus began, his tone shifting from brotherly annoyance to clinical professional detachment. "We run extensive background checks on executives. We audit financial records. We handle severance packages and non-disclosure agreements. We know exactly who is getting hired, and more importantly, we know exactly who is getting fired." Marcus paused, letting the heavy weight of his words settle over the silent dining room. He turned his gaze away from his sister and looked directly at Trent, who was now sweating so profusely his expensive dress shirt was physically clinging to his skin. "Your husband is not a branch director," Chloe Marcus stated, his voice echoing clearly in the quiet space. "In fact, your husband is not currently employed in any capacity whatsoever. Trent was unceremoniously fired from that tech company exactly 7 months ago." The dining room plunged into a deafening dead silence. The transition was so sudden, it felt like all the air had been violently sucked out of the room. Beatrice gasped loudly, covering her mouth with her trembling manicured hand. Her eyes darted wildly between her son and her favorite son-in-law, completely unable to comprehend what she had just heard. Chloe froze completely. Her defiant defensive posture collapsed in an instant, and her arms dropped limply to her sides. She blinked rapidly, her mind desperately trying to process the devastating information her brother had just casually dropped onto the dinner table. "That is impossible," she whispered, shaking her head in fierce denial. "You are lying. You are just saying that to hurt us because you are jealous. He goes to work every single day. I wish I was lying for the sake of my young nephew." "Marcus," replied, his voice devoid of any sympathy. "But the truth is, Trent was not just laid off due to budget cuts or corporate restructuring. He was terminated with extreme prejudice for gross financial misconduct. He was caught embezzling company funds to cover his own personal expenses." Chloe let out a choked sob, taking a physical step back as if Marcus had just struck her. Marcus was absolutely unrelenting. He was using a corporate credit card to pay for expensive lunches, luxury car rentals, and fake business trips. Marcus continued methodically laying out the damning evidence. "The only reason he is not currently sitting in a federal prison cell is because the company decided to quietly terminate his employment rather than risk a public scandal that would severely damage their investor relations. They offered him a quiet exit in exchange for his immediate resignation and a promise of full financial restitution. I watched Trent as Marcus laid out his darkest secret for the entire family to hear. The arrogant man who had proudly slammed $300 onto the dining table just minutes ago was entirely gone. He looked exactly like a cornered rat. His face had drained of all color, turning a sickly ashen gray. His jaw worked silently up and down, entirely unable to form a single coherent word of defense. He looked completely shattered, stripped of the fake corporate armor he used to intimidate his own family. He did not receive a performance bonus last quarter, Chloe Marcus added, driving the final nail into the coffin. He received a modest severance package that he had to fight tooth and nail for, and he blew through the entire amount in less than 2 months, trying to keep up appearances for you and your mother. That designer leather wallet he just flashed at my wife is completely empty, aside from a stack of maxed-out credit cards. He has absolutely no income. He has no authority. He is a fraud who has been lying to you and to this entire family for over half a year. The room felt entirely unstable, like we were all standing on the deck of a sinking ship. Beatrice was staring at Trent with a look of absolute horror. She had based her entire personality around bragging about her wealthy, successful white son-in-law to her friends at the country club. She had used Trent's imaginary success to justify treating Marcus like a secondary member of the family. Realizing that her golden child was married to an unemployed criminal completely shattered her fragile worldview. Chloe slowly turned her head to look at her husband. The sheer visceral panic in her eyes was palpable. She had built her entire identity on being superior to me. She constantly mocked my long hours at the office, bragging about how her husband fully provided for her luxurious lifestyle. Now she was staring directly at a man who was entirely broke and hiding a massive, shameful secret. Trent, she whispered, her voice cracking with pure desperation. Trent, please say something. Tell him he is lying. Tell him you still have your job. Tell me where you have been going every day for the past 7 months. Trent looked at his wife, his eyes darting frantically around the room as if searching for an escape route that simply did not exist. He was trapped in a lie so massive it was entirely suffocating him. The walls were closing in, and he had absolutely nowhere left to hide. He looked at Marcus, then at Beatrice, and finally back at Chloe. He stammered incoherently, his hands shaking violently as he gripped the edge of the heavy oak dining table. His knuckles were completely white from the strain. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out at first. He was drowning in his own deception. "He is lying!" Trent finally choked out his voice, sounding weak, pathetic, and entirely unconvincing. "He is just making this all up to ruin us. He hates me. He has always hated me. Do I not put on a suit and drive to work every single morning, Chloe? Do I not leave the house at 8 o'clock? You do put on a suit." "Trent," Marcus agreed, his voice completely flat and devoid of any sympathy. "You wake up every single morning, you tie a perfect Windsor knot, you kiss your wife goodbye, and you walk out the front door right at 8 o'clock. But you do not go to a corporate office. You drive your car to the Starbucks on the other side of town. You buy a single black coffee and you sit in the corner booth for 8 hours a day. You open your laptop and you use their free wireless internet to endlessly scroll through online job boards. You spend your entire day applying for executive positions that you are now completely unqualified to hold, given the fact that you were terminated for federal financial crimes. You sit there hiding from your own wife, terrified that she will discover you are no longer the wealthy, powerful provider she married." Chloe let out a sharp, trembling breath. Her eyes were darting rapidly back and forth between her husband and her brother. She desperately wanted Marcus to be lying. She wanted to scream and call him a liar, but the sheer level of precise detail in his voice was impossible to ignore. Trent looked away from her, completely unable to meet her gaze. He stared down at his hands resting on the table. His silence was a much louder confession than any words he could have ever spoken. "And what about that car?" Marcus continued, relentlessly stripping away the next shiny layer of Trent's fake empire. "You love to brag about that pristine white Tesla parked out front in my mother's driveway right now. You told everyone at this table that you bought it outright with your massive quarterly bonus. You told Chloe it was a symbol of your continued corporate dominance. But you do not own that vehicle, Trent. You did not buy it. You are leasing it. You leased it specifically because you needed your suburban neighbors to see those expensive doors open in your driveway. And according to the repossession order that crossed my desk yesterday morning, you are exactly 90 days past due on those lease payments." The color completely drained from Chloe's face. She grabbed the edge of the heavy oak table to steady herself, as if the entire room had suddenly tilted beneath her. "Trent," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the soft jazz music still playing from the ceiling speakers. "Is that true? Are we losing the car?" Trent squeezed his eyes shut, but Marcus did not give him a chance to formulate another lie. "The car is the absolute least of your problems," Chloe Marcus said, his tone shifting to a grim, terrifying warning. "Because hiding his unemployment is an incredibly expensive full-time job. Buying coffees every day, paying for gas, treating himself to expensive lunches so he does not have to come home and face you during business hours. All of that requires capital. Capital that Trent no longer legally possesses. In the past 7 months, your husband has applied for and completely maxed out 4 separate high-yield credit cards. He has been taking cash advances from one card just to pay the minimum monthly balance on the others. It is a textbook debt spiral. He has accumulated tens of thousands of dollars in high-interest consumer debt just to maintain the daily illusion of his routine." Chloe pressed both of her hands over her mouth, a muffled sob escaping her lips. The perfectly curated suburban life she loved to flaunt on social media was completely disintegrating right in front of her eyes. She thought about her expensive organic groceries, the private Pilates classes, the luxury boutique clothing she bought just last week. She thought about the ridiculous country club memberships and the private school tuition for Braden. She suddenly realized that every single aspect of her arrogant, luxurious lifestyle had been completely funded by a mountain of toxic, crippling debt. She was not a wealthy, successful housewife looking down on her working sister-in-law. She was living entirely on borrowed time and stolen money. The dining room felt incredibly claustrophobic. It was as if the walls were slowly pulling back away from us, leaving the villains of this story completely isolated on a shrinking island of their own deceit. Trent's grand display of power, slamming that designer leather wallet onto the table and offering to buy my son's birthday present with cash, now looked incredibly pathetic. It was a hollow, desperate act of a man who was drowning and trying to pretend he knew how to swim. "But wait," Chloe stammered, dropping her shaking hands from her face. Her mind was racing frantically, trying to find a single logical explanation to grab onto. She looked at Marcus, her eyes wide with absolute panic. If his credit cards are completely maxed out and he has not had a paycheck in 7 months, how are we surviving? How did we pay the massive mortgage on our house last week? How did Trent just pull 3 crisp $100 bills out of his wallet to buy those tickets? Where is the money coming from, Marcus? Tell me where the money is coming from." Trent swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously in his throat. He did not say a word to his wife. Instead, he slowly lifted his head and looked directly across the length of the table at Beatrice. Beatrice stiffened instantly. Her spine went completely rigid against the back of her chair. She absolutely refused to look at Trent. She kept her eyes glued to her half-empty crystal wine glass, her chest rising and falling in quick, shallow, panicked breaths. The sweet, innocent matriarch routine was entirely gone. She looked exactly like an accomplice who had just realized the authorities were kicking down the front door. Marcus noticed the silent, desperate exchange between his mother and his brother-in-law. He let out a low, dark chuckle that sent a visible shiver straight down Trent's spine. I watched the final realization dawn on my husband as his brilliant legal mind connected the last missing pieces of this toxic family puzzle. He slowly turned his head away from his devastated sister and locked his piercing dark eyes entirely onto his mother. Marcus leaned forward, resting both of his large hands flat on the dining table. The commanding authority radiating from him was absolute. "Why do you not answer her?" Marcus asked, his voice deadly quiet and heavily laced with venom. Beatrice flinched as if she had been physically struck. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Her lips trembled and she clutched her cloth napkin in her lap, twisting the fabric tightly around her fingers. "Your daughter just asked a very important question," Mother Marcus pressed, refusing to let her look away. "Where did the money come from? How has Trent been keeping his house out of active foreclosure for the past 6 months while hiding his unemployment? How is he walking around with hundreds of dollars in cash in his pocket?" Chloe turned her head slowly to look at her mother. "Mom?" she asked, her voice trembling with confusion and fear. "What is he talking about? Are you giving Trent money? Did you know about this?" Beatrice looked absolutely terrified. The carefully constructed hierarchy of her golden family was collapsing in real time. She had spent her entire life trying to orchestrate the perfect image, sacrificing my husband and my son to maintain the illusion of Chloe's superiority. But the truth was finally dragging her out into the harsh, unforgiving light. Marcus tilted his head slightly, his expression hardening into a mask of pure, relentless justice. "If you are not going to tell her the truth, Mother, then maybe you should tell everyone at this table about the financial paperwork you begged me to legally notarize for you last month." The heavy crystal wine glass finally slipped from Beatrice and her trembling fingers. It hit the edge of the mahogany table before crashing down onto the expensive Persian rug below. The glass shattered into dozens of jagged pieces, sending a dark, heavy splash of expensive red wine across the intricate woven fabric. It looked exactly like a fresh, dark blood stain spreading rapidly across the floor. No one moved to clean it up. The sharp sound of the shattering glass seemed to break whatever fragile spell was still holding the room together. Beatrice let out a high-pitched, panicked sob. She pressed both of her hands tightly over her face, her shoulders shaking violently under her expensive silk blouse. "Marcus, please," she begged, her voice muffled and wet with tears. "Not now. Do not do this to me in front of everyone. I am your mother. You are supposed to protect me from things like this." Marcus did not offer her a single ounce of sympathy. His expression remained carved from solid stone. "You lost the right to my protection the moment you decided to steal from my child to cover up for a criminal," he replied, his voice completely devoid of any warmth. "You wanted to handle family business at the dinner table, Mother. You wanted to publicly humiliate my wife in front of an audience. So let us handle all the family business right here and right now." I sat perfectly still, leaning back against the plush upholstery of my dining chair. A slow, faint smile touched the corners of my lips. If you could capture the absolute essence of sweet poetic justice, it was happening right in front of my eyes. I watched the mighty, untouchable matriarch of this toxic family completely crumble under the crushing weight of her own massive deception. For 10 long years, Beatrice had made it her personal mission to make me feel small. She had weaponized her wealth, her status, and her country club memberships to constantly remind me that I was an outsider who did not belong in her pristine suburban world. But looking at her now, weeping over spilled wine and broken lies, she did not look powerful at all. She just looked incredibly pathetic. Marcus turned his attention back to his sister, who was staring wildly at the spilled wine, as if it held the answers to her collapsing universe. "Last month, Chloe, our mother came to my law office unannounced," Marcus said, speaking slowly, so every single syllable landed with maximum devastating impact. "She did not come to bring me lunch or ask about her grandson. She came to my office to beg me to expedite and formally notarize a stack of high-priority financial documents. She bypassed her usual conservative bank and went through a private high-risk lender because she needed the cash immediately and she needed it done quietly." Chloe frowned deeply, her eyes darting between Marcus and her sobbing mother. What kind of financial documents, Marcus? She asked, her voice shaking uncontrollably. Mom paid off this house 5 years ago. What did she possibly need cash for? She took out a second mortgage on this property, Chloe Marcus stated clearly and cleanly, severing the very last thread of Beatrice and her fake reality. She borrowed $120,000 against her own home equity. Chloe gasped loudly, grabbing the edge of the table again to keep herself from falling out of her chair. Mom, why? She cried out, her voice echoing with pure disbelief. Why would you risk the house? We have plenty of money. Trent makes a 6-figure salary. If you needed financial help, you should have just asked us. We are family. Marcus let out another harsh, humorless laugh. He pointed a long, accusing finger directly at Trent, who was now physically shrinking down into his chair, trying to make himself as invisible as possible. She did not take out the loan for herself, Chloe. She took out a second mortgage so she could hand a certified cashier's check for $120,000 directly to your unemployed fraud of a husband. The silence that followed was absolute and terrifying. Chloe slowly turned her completely horrified gaze toward Trent. The man sitting next to her looked nothing like the confident, arrogant executive who had arrived at dinner 2 hours ago. He was sweating heavily, his eyes darting frantically toward the floor, completely unable to look his wife in the face. Beatrice dropped her hands from her face, revealing her ruined, tear-streaked makeup. "I was just trying to help," she wailed, her voice defensive and shrill. Trent came to me crying. He told me he had made some bad, aggressive investments in the stock market and that the bank was threatening to seize your joint accounts. He swore to me it was just a temporary cash flow problem. He promised he would pay me back the moment his quarterly bonus cleared. I was trying to protect your marriage, Chloe. I could not let everyone at the country club find out that my daughter was married to a broke, unemployed failure. It would be entirely humiliating for all of us. I had to protect our family image. I sat there quietly absorbing the sheer staggering magnitude of her foolishness. She had literally mortgaged her own future to protect a fake image. In the African American community, we talk so much about the importance of building generational wealth, of passing down property and stability to our children. Beatrice had exactly that. She owned a massive, sprawling home, free and clear. But she was so blinded by her toxic obsession with status and her desperate need to prove that Chloe had married a superior white provider that she willingly handed over a small fortune to a man who had already proven himself to be a thief. She literally set her own generational wealth on fire just to keep Trent warm. "And what exactly did you do with that money?" Trent Marcus demanded, his voice echoing like thunder in the dining room. "Because we all know you did not use it to pay off your massive credit card debt. You certainly did not use it to catch up on the lease payments for that ridiculous car parked outside. You took over $100,000 from an elderly woman to cover up your own criminal incompetence. So where is the money?" Trent opened his mouth, but he was hyperventilating so badly, he could not form a single coherent word. He just shook his head back and forth, his hands trembling violently on his lap. He had taken the money to maintain his daily illusion. He had used it to pay the minimum balances on his cards, to buy expensive lunches, to keep up the appearance of a wealthy provider, while he sat in a coffee shop pretending to work. He had even tried day trading cryptocurrency in a desperate, pathetic attempt to win the money back, and he had lost absolutely every single penny of it. He had quite literally burned through his mother-in-law's home equity to buy himself a few more months of fake pride. Chloe stared at Trent, her chest rising and falling in rapid, panicked breaths. Her mind was racing desperately, trying to reconcile the massive, terrifying truth with the everyday lies she had been living. She thought about the last few weeks. She thought about the constant, subtle arguments over the grocery bill. She thought about the way Trent would suddenly snap at her in pure rage whenever she mentioned buying something new for the house or enrolling Braden in a new extracurricular activity. The realization hit her with the physical force of a speeding freight train. She suddenly lunged forward, grabbing the expensive fabric of Trent and his dress shirt. She yanked him toward her with a sudden, violent strength that startled everyone at the table. You took $120,000 from my mother, Chloe screamed, her voice tearing through the room with absolute pure despair. You took her money to hide the fact that you got fired for stealing. Trent tried to pull away from her, gripping her wrists in a panic. Chloe, please calm down, he begged, his voice cracking pathetically. I was going to fix it. I was going to get another job. I was going to make it all back for us. I promise. Chloe did not let go. She shook him violently, her face twisted in an expression of sheer agony and blinding rage. The fake unity of the Golden family was officially permanently shattered. The walls of their perfect suburban illusion had completely collapsed, leaving nothing but the ugly, terrifying reality of their financial and moral ruin. You gave him money! Chloe screamed, turning her head to glare at her sobbing mother before snapping her furious gaze back to her husband. You took $120,000 from her. You have all that money, and yet yesterday morning you looked me dead in the eye and told me we could not afford to buy milk for Braden. Trent recoiled from his wife as if she had physically struck him. He held his hands up in a weak, pathetic gesture of surrender, but he had absolutely no words left to defend himself. The reality of his complete failure was hanging naked in the air for everyone to see. He had literally stolen food from his own child's mouth to maintain the facade of a wealthy corporate executive. Chloe pushed her chair back violently and stood up, wrapping her arms around her own stomach as if she was going to be physically sick. She stumbled away from the table, putting as much distance between herself and her husband as the dining room would allow. I looked around the table, taking in the full panoramic view of their absolute destruction. The room that had felt so suffocating and hostile just an hour ago was now a graveyard of shattered egos. Chloe was weeping silently by the large bay window, mourning the death of her fake suburban empire. Trent was sitting completely frozen, staring blankly at the dark wine stains spreading across the expensive rug. And Beatrice was entirely hyperventilating. The untouchable matriarch, the woman who had spent a decade treating me like a second-class citizen, was now gasping for air in her own dining room. Beatrice realized in that exact moment that the money was permanently gone. Trent had gambled and spent away her entire life savings, and there was absolutely no quarterly bonus coming to replenish her bank account. She was drowning in a massive high-interest loan that she had secured with the very roof over her head. She suddenly turned her desperate, tear-streaked face toward my husband. Marcus, she sobbed, reaching her shaking hands out toward him across the heavy oak table. Marcus, please, you have to listen to me. I just wanted to help your sister's family. I was trying to do the right thing for Chloe and little Braden. I did not know he was going to lose it all. You have to understand my intentions were good. Marcus did not reach out to take her hand. He stood perfectly still, his posture radiating absolute zero warmth. Good intentions do not pay off a second mortgage, mother, he replied, his voice echoing with clinical detachment. Beatrice let out a loud, agonizing wail. I cannot pay it, Marcus, she cried, gripping the edge of the table so hard her knuckles turned entirely white. The monthly payments are enormous. The interest rate is adjusting next week, and I cannot keep up with it anymore. My retirement pension barely covers the minimum balance. They are sending me threatening letters. They are calling my house constantly. She looked up at him, her eyes wide with a sudden frantic hope. She had spent her entire life using people to get what she wanted, and she was about to try and use her own son to clean up her catastrophic mess. You are a bank lawyer, Marcus, she pleaded, her voice rising in pitch. You work for one of the largest financial institutions in the country. You help massive corporations write off millions of dollars in bad debt every single day. You know all the legal loopholes. You have connections. You have to help me erase this debt. You have to make these lenders go away before they take my house. The sheer audacity of her request hung heavily in the air. Even in her lowest, most desperate moment, Beatrice still viewed Marcus not as a beloved son, but as a tool she could exploit to protect herself and her golden child. She had spent the entire evening allowing Trent to disrespect him, attempting to steal from his 10-year-old son, and treating his wife like garbage. But the second her own actions cornered her, she expected Marcus to risk his entire legal career and his professional license to perform a financial miracle on her behalf. Marcus looked down at his mother with an expression of profound absolute disgust. He slowly shook his head, his dark eyes narrowing into sharp, dangerous slits. "You think a bank is our family's personal printing machine?" Marcus asked, his voice dropping an octave into a cold, terrifying register. "You think I can just log into a corporate database, wave a magic legal wand, and erase $120,000 of legally binding debt just because you share my last name?" Beatrice flinched, but she continued to beg. "You can figure it out, Marcus," she insisted blindly. "You are so smart. You always figure things out. Please just talk to the people at the bank. Tell them it was a mistake. Tell them I am your mother." "You do not even understand what you have done," Marcus interrupted, slicing through her delusions with surgical precision. "Because you were so desperate to hide this transaction from me and from your friends at the country club, you did not go to a reputable commercial bank. You went to a predatory private lending fund. You took out a high-risk collateral loan with a ballooning interest rate that was specifically designed to trap desperate people exactly like you. You signed a contract that explicitly waived your standard grace periods." Beatrice sobbed harder, burying her face in her hands. "I did not read all those pages," she wept. "I just signed where they told me to sign. Trent said he would pay it back before the interest kicked in." Marcus let out a harsh, bitter sigh. "Well, unfortunately for you, Mother, the private lending fund you chose to do business with does not care about what Trent promised you. They only care about the collateral you pledged, which is this house." He took a slow, deliberate step closer to the table, forcing Beatrice to look up at him. "And do you know what happens to predatory private lending funds when they accumulate too many high-risk collateral loans?" Marcus asked, his voice perfectly steady. "They get bought out by much larger financial institutions who want to acquire their real estate portfolios." Beatrice blinked, her tear-soaked eyelashes fluttering in pure confusion. She did not understand corporate finance, but the terrifying tone of my husband's voice told her that she was about to hear something completely devastating. 30 days ago, Marcus continued delivering the truth with absolute relentless clarity. That specific private lending fund was acquired by my bank. My employer purchased their entire portfolio of distressed debt. The dining room fell into a silence so deep it felt like the air pressure had instantly dropped. Chloe stopped crying by the window, turning around to stare at her brother in absolute shock. Trent slowly lifted his head from his hands, his face completely pale. Beatrice stared at Marcus, her mouth hanging open. "You," she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. "Your bank owns my loan." Marcus nodded slowly. "As the lead senior counsel for the restructuring division, I was personally tasked with auditing the newly acquired distressed assets. Imagine my absolute surprise, Mother, when I opened a digital file last Tuesday morning and saw my own childhood home address listed under the category of severe delinquency. Imagine how I felt seeing your signature on a document pledging the house my father worked his entire life to pay off to cover the gambling debts of a disgraced unemployed fraud." Beatrice let out a choked, agonizing gasp. She reached for Marcus again, but he smoothly stepped back entirely out of her reach. "Marcus, please," she begged, her voice cracking into a high, desperate screech. "If your bank owns the loan, then you have the power to stop them. You can throw the file away. You can give me an extension. You can protect me. You cannot let them take my home. Where will I go? Where will Chloe and Braden go?" "I do not have the power to do anything for you," Mother, Marcus stated with absolute finality. "In fact, the moment I recognized your name on that file, I was legally and ethically obligated to formally recuse myself from the entire account due to a direct conflict of interest. I handed your file over to the Aggressive Asset Recovery Division. They do not care that you are my mother. They only care that you are exactly 90 days past due on a massive balloon payment that you have absolutely no capacity to pay." Beatrice began to shake, her entire body trembling as the catastrophic reality of her situation finally settled into her bones. She had tried to outsmart everyone, and she had managed to entirely destroy herself in the process. She had chosen to protect Trent's fake pride over her own financial security, and now she was going to lose absolutely everything. Marcus reached his large hand into the inner breast pocket of his tailored suit jacket. The movement was slow, deliberate, and incredibly heavy with impending doom. He pulled out a thick, heavy manila envelope. The edges were sealed with rigid, clear tape, and the front of the envelope was stamped with the bright, bold red seal of the county court system. He held the envelope up for a brief second, allowing the bright red ink to catch the light of the crystal chandelier above them. Then, with a quick flick of his wrist, Marcus tossed the heavy envelope directly onto the center of the dining table. It landed with a loud, dull thud right on top of the expensive imported cold cuts platter, knocking a silver serving fork onto the floor. "Foreclosure notice," Marcus announced, his voice ringing through the room like the final strike of a judge's gavel. The Asset Recovery Division filed the paperwork on Thursday. The judge signed the expedited order yesterday afternoon. I simply volunteered to deliver it to you in person tonight so you would not be surprised by the sheriff deputies showing up at your front door tomorrow morning. Beatrice stared at the heavy manila envelope resting on the sliced meats as if it were a highly explosive bomb. She did not reach out to touch it. She just stared at it, her breathing shallow and ragged, her eyes wide with total, absolute terror. "You and them have exactly 14 days to move out," Marcus said, staring down at the shattered remains of his toxic family. "I suggest you tell Trent to stop buying Starbucks and start buying cardboard boxes." Trent stared at the heavy envelope resting on the sliced meats as if it were a venomous snake about to strike. His mind completely shattered under the crushing weight of his exposed reality. The ugly truth was entirely out in the open. His wife was looking at him with pure, unadulterated hatred. His mother-in-law was financially ruined. He had absolutely no job, no money, no car, and now his fake corporate authority was completely dead and buried. His fragile ego could not process the absolute devastation of his complete failure. He looked at Marcus standing tall, calm, and entirely unbothered at the end of the dining table. In a desperate, pathetic attempt to reclaim some shred of his shattered masculinity, Trent completely snapped. He let out a loud, primal roar of pure, humiliated rage. He violently shoved his heavy dining chair backward, causing it to tip over and crash against the floorboards. He lunged directly at my husband across the length of the room. He swung his fist blindly, aiming a wild, desperate punch right at Marcus' jaw. He wanted to wipe the calm, authoritative look off my husband's face. He wanted to physically punish the man who had effortlessly stripped away his protective armor. But Marcus did not even flinch. He did not step back or raise his voice in alarm. He simply shifted his weight smoothly and intercepted Trent's swinging arm mid-air. With a swift, effortless motion, Marcus twisted Trent's wrist and used the heavier man's own reckless momentum entirely against him. Marcus shoved him hard toward the empty space of the living room. Trent stumbled backward, wildly off balance, his expensive leather shoes slipping entirely on the polished hardwood floor. He crashed down hard onto his back, knocking over a heavy wooden side table. A decorative porcelain vase sitting on top of the table shattered into 100 sharp pieces, raining down around his shoulders. The physical altercation lasted less than 3 seconds, but the impact was absolute. Trent lay there groaning loudly, gripping his shoulder and gasping for air. He looked incredibly small and pathetic, tangled in the broken porcelain and spilled water. Chloe did not rush to his side. She did not scream for someone to help her husband. She just stood frozen by the large bay window, staring down at him with a look of absolute disgust. She looked at him like he was a disgusting stranger she completely despised. Beatrice remained totally paralyzed in her chair, her hands covering her mouth entirely, unable to process the sheer violence and chaos that had just erupted in her pristine home. The room fell completely silent, except for Trent's heavy, ragged breathing. I decided it was time to end this miserable dinner party once and for all. I slowly stood up from my chair, smoothing down the front of my dress with absolute perfect composure. I walked around the heavy oak table, my heels clicking sharply and methodically against the hardwood floor. I stopped right next to Marcus' dinner plate. Resting there, completely forgotten in the chaos, were the three crisp $100 bills Trent had arrogantly slammed down just an hour earlier. I reached out and picked up the cash, folding the bills neatly between my fingers. I walked over to where Trent was still struggling to push himself up from the floor. I stood over him, looking down at the red-faced, sweating man who had tried so desperately to make me feel small and insignificant. I did not feel angry anymore. I did not feel the need to yell or scream. I just felt a profound, satisfying sense of absolute closure. I held my hand out over his face and simply let go of the money. The three green bills fluttered gently through the air, landing directly on Trent's chest and cheek. "Take this and buy yourself some cardboard boxes," I said, my voice perfectly calm and echoing clearly in the silent room. "You are going to need them to pack up whatever cheap suits you have left before the bank locks the doors. And as for stealing that digital data from my personal phone, my corporate lawyer will send you a formal subpoena tomorrow morning. I highly suggest you do not ignore it." Trent did not say a single word. He just lay there on the floor, breathing heavily, his eyes wide with total absolute defeat. The money rested on his chest, mocking him with its absolute worthlessness. He knew he had lost everything, and there was no coming back from this humiliation. I turned my back on him, entirely dismissing his existence from my life. I walked over to my son. Malik had watched the entire scene unfold, but he did not look scared or traumatized. He looked at his father with pure admiration, and he looked at me with a soft, understanding smile. The heavy burden of feeling less than his spoiled cousin was completely gone from his small shoulders. He knew in that moment that he was deeply loved and fiercely protected. I reached out and gently took Malik's small, warm hand in mine. "It is time to go home, sweetheart," I said softly, giving his fingers a reassuring squeeze. Marcus walked over to the coat rack near the front hallway. He picked up my long camel trench coat and brought it over to me. He gently draped the heavy, warm fabric over my shoulders, his hands lingering for a brief second to offer a silent, loving squeeze. He looked down at me, his dark eyes filled with absolute, unwavering solidarity. We had faced the toxic radiation of his family, and we had emerged entirely untouched and victorious. We turned around and walked toward the heavy wooden front door. We did not look back at the ruined dining room. We did not say goodbye to the weeping matriarch or the devastated sister. We simply walked out of the house as a united, unbreakable front, leaving them to drown in the toxic mess they had created for themselves. Marcus opened the front door, and the cool, crisp evening air rushed in instantly, clearing away the suffocating heavy tension of the house. We stepped out onto the front porch, and Marcus pulled the heavy door shut firmly behind us. The sharp click of the deadbolt locking into place felt exactly like the closing chapter of a very long and exhausting book. It was the sound of a permanent boundary being successfully established. But the peaceful silence of the suburban night did not last long. As we walked down the brick pathway toward our car, the complete chaotic destruction of the Golden family finally erupted behind us. Through the thick glass windows of the house, we could hear the absolute terrifying aftermath of the truth tearing them apart. We heard the loud, violent crash of something heavy smashing against the living room wall, sounding like a framed picture being thrown in pure rage. We heard Chloe screaming at the absolute top of her lungs, hysterically demanding an immediate divorce and cursing Trent for ruining her perfect life and stealing from her mother. And underneath it all, echoing through the neighborhood, we heard the high-pitched, agonizing wails of Beatrice. She was a mother-in-law who had sacrificed absolutely everything for an illusion of superiority and ended up with nothing but a foreclosed home and a broken family. The sounds of their miserable suffering echoed loudly into the dark night, but we did not stop or turn around. We simply kept walking toward our beautiful future. Sitting here now in my beautifully sunlit living room, I can still remember the exact sound of that heavy deadbolt locking behind us. It was the sound of absolute, undeniable freedom. I reach over to the smooth glass coffee table and pick up my crystal glass of water. I take a slow, refreshing sip, letting the cool liquid soothe my throat. The air in my home is quiet and peaceful. There is no tension, no walking on eggshells, and absolutely no toxic family members waiting to tear me down or steal from my child. It has been a little over a month since that explosive Sunday dinner, and the fallout was exactly as catastrophic as Marcus promised it would be. True to his word, the Asset Recovery Division of Marcus Bank did not waste a single second. Exactly 14 days after that dinner party, the county sheriff pulled up to Beatrice and her sprawling brick colonial house. The neighbors she had spent years trying to impress stood on their perfectly manicured lawns, watching as the deputies officially sealed the front doors. The massive house that was supposed to be her ultimate symbol of status, the property that was supposed to secure our generational wealth, was padlocked and scheduled to be auctioned off to the highest bidder. Beatrice had to pack 30 years of memories and fake pride into cheap cardboard boxes, while the entire neighborhood gossiped about her sudden absolute financial ruin. But Beatrice was not the only one who lost everything in the span of a few short weeks. When the illusion finally shattered, Trent proved exactly what kind of man he truly was. He was a profound coward. He could not face the reality of being a broke, unemployed fraud, and he certainly could not handle Chloe screaming at him every single waking moment about the mess he had created. So 3 days after the foreclosure notice was delivered, Trent packed a single black duffel bag in the middle of the night and simply vanished. We found out later from a mutual acquaintance that he ran off with a 22-year-old bartender who works at a cheap dive bar 2 towns over. He abandoned his wife and his 8-year-old son without a second thought, leaving behind nothing but a mountain of unpaid bills. And he did not just leave Chloe with a broken heart. He left her with the absolute financial devastation he had secretly accumulated. Because they were legally married, Chloe was inextricably tied to the massive debt Trent had built up over the past 7 months. The collection agencies did not care that he lied to her. They only cared that her name was attached to the joint accounts. The luxury boutique clothing, the organic groceries, the expensive private Pilates classes, they all came back to haunt her. Chloe went from bragging about her wealthy executive husband to fielding dozens of aggressive phone calls from debt collectors every single day. The pristine white Tesla was repossessed straight out of the driveway before they even had to move out of the house. With no house, no money, and no wealthy provider to save them, Beatrice and Chloe had absolutely nowhere else to go. The affluent country club friends Beatrice loved so much completely abandoned her the moment her bank accounts dried up. They stopped answering her calls and conveniently lost her invitation to their weekly luncheons. Without her wealth, Beatrice was entirely useless to them. So the former untouchable matriarch and her spoiled golden child were forced to pack up their remaining belongings and move into a cramped 2-bedroom apartment in a Section 8 subsidized housing complex on the far side of the city. They went from having private nannies and sprawling backyards to sharing a single tiny bathroom with peeling wallpaper. Braden was pulled out of his expensive private school and enrolled in the local public school, where he could no longer throw violent tantrums without facing severe consequences from the administration. Chloe finally had to do the one thing she had spent her entire adult life avoiding. She had to get a real job. She is currently working 40 hours a week as a cashier at a local discount grocery store, standing on her feet all day just to afford basic necessities. The irony is completely unavoidable. The woman who constantly mocked me for working hard to build my business is now bagging cheap groceries just to survive the month. You would think that such a massive, humbling experience would force Beatrice to look inward and realize the magnitude of her own toxic mistakes. You would think she would feel a deep, profound sense of shame for destroying her own life just to spite me and elevate a worthless son-in-law. But narcissists rarely ever change. Instead of taking accountability, Beatrice doubled down on her favorite tactic. She tried to play the victim. For the first 3 weeks after the eviction, she called Marcus relentlessly. She would call his personal cell phone 20 times a day, leaving long, hysterical voicemails. She would cry and wail into the receiver, begging him to save her. She would tell him how terrible the new apartment smelled, how her back ached from the cheap mattress, and how much Braden missed his big, beautiful backyard. She tried to use every single ounce of maternal guilt she could muster. She demanded that Marcus wire her money, pay off Chloe's debt, and rent them a nice house in the suburbs because he owed it to the woman who gave him life. She even had the absolute audacity to suggest that our son Malik should share some of his savings account to help his poor, struggling cousin. When the crying did not work, her voicemails would turn angry and vicious, accusing Marcus of being a cold, heartless monster who abandoned his own flesh and blood. But Marcus is a man of his word. He told them he was done, and he meant it with every fiber of his being. He listened to exactly one of those crying voicemails before he made his final move. He did not call her back to argue. He did not try to explain logic to a woman committed to misunderstanding him. He did not engage with her toxic emotional manipulation. He simply drove down to the local cellular provider and completely changed his phone number. He changed my number too, just to be absolutely safe. We completely erased our digital footprints from their lives, blocking them on every single social media platform and email server. The only piece of communication Marcus offered his mother and sister was a single brief email sent from a brand new generic address. It contained no warm greetings, no emotional farewells, and absolutely no apologies. It consisted of exactly one sentence that slammed the door shut on their toxicity forever. All future communication regarding this family must go through my retained legal counsel. That single email was the final necessary swing of the axe, cutting away the dead weight that had been dragging our family down for over a decade. The very next morning, the sun seemed to shine just a little bit brighter. The oppressive heavy cloud that had constantly hovered over our marriage completely vanished. And when Malik's 10th birthday finally arrived, we did not celebrate it in a tense dining room walking on eggshells to appease a jealous aunt or a manipulative grandmother. We celebrated it exactly the way we had promised. We packed our bags and drove out to Cedar Point. The weather was absolutely perfect. The sky was a brilliant, vibrant shade of blue without a single cloud in sight. The moment we walked through those massive front gates, the energy completely shifted. We were greeted personally by the park director and escorted directly to our private VIP cabana. I watched my son step into that luxurious shaded space, and his eyes lit up like fireworks. He had a private catered buffet filled with all of his favorite foods, ice-cold drinks waiting in a premium cooler, and a dedicated concierge staff ready to cater to his every single whim. He was treated like an absolute king. There was no Braden throwing violent tantrums and demanding to open Malik's presents. There was no Chloe sitting in the corner making passive-aggressive comments about how much money we were spending. And there was no Beatrice constantly reminding Malik that he needed to sacrifice his own joy to make someone else comfortable. For the first time in his entire life, my son was allowed to just be the center of attention without feeling incredibly guilty about it. We spent the entire weekend laughing until our stomachs physically ached. Thanks to the executive all-access passes my company managed, we bypassed every single long, agonizing line in the park. We rode the tallest, fastest roller coasters, feeling the rush of the wind and screaming at the top of our lungs. I sat next to Marcus on the front row of a massive steel coaster, and for the first time in months, I saw my husband look completely carefree. The heavy defensive armor he always had to wear around his mother was completely gone. He was just a happy father, enjoying a beautiful summer day with his family. Watching Malik run ahead of us, a massive cotton candy in one hand, and his VIP lanyard swinging proudly around his neck, brought a profound sense of clarity to my mind. As a Black woman who has fought tooth and nail to build an empire from the ground up, I spend a lot of time thinking about the concept of generational wealth. In our community, we talk so much about financial literacy. We talk about breaking the cycle of poverty, buying real estate, investing in the stock market, and leaving behind thick trust funds so our children do not have to struggle the way our ancestors did. We emphasize the importance of passing down tangible, valuable assets to secure our family names. But as I watched my son laugh freely without a single shadow of anxiety in his bright eyes, I realized something incredibly important. Generational wealth is not just about the money sitting in your bank account or the property deeds locked inside a safe. True generational wealth is the emotional and psychological safety you provide for your children. It is the absolute deliberate refusal to pass down the trauma, the toxic behaviors, and the dysfunctional family dynamics that broke your own spirit. What good is leaving my son a multi-million-dollar company if I also leave him with a shattered sense of self-worth? What good is a massive trust fund if he grows up believing he has to constantly shrink himself to make mediocre people feel powerful? Beatrice had financial wealth, but she possessed absolutely zero emotional wealth. She used her money as a weapon to control, manipulate, and demean the people around her. She was actively passing down a legacy of jealousy, entitlement, and profound conditional love. In the Black community, we are often raised with the deeply ingrained idea that you never turn your back on your kin. The Sunday dinners, the holiday cookouts, the church services, they are all supposed to be sacred, safe spaces. But too often, those exact spaces are used as a cover for profound emotional abuse. The elders demand unquestioning respect, even when they offer absolutely none in return. The toxic family members are constantly protected, while the victims are simply told to pray about it and let it go. We are conditioned to endure suffering in the name of family loyalty. But endurance is not a badge of honor when the people hurting you are the ones who are supposed to love you the most. By standing up from that dining table and walking out of that house, Marcus and I did something far more valuable than simply protecting a $3,000 VIP package. We actively protected Malik's mind. We taught him that he is worthy of celebration. We showed him that his boundaries are sacred, and that nobody, not even his own blood relatives, has the right to disrespect him or steal his joy. We broke a toxic generational curse right there in that dining room, and we replaced it with a new legacy of self-respect and absolute intolerance for abuse. There is a cultural expectation that you must always forgive and forget. People will tell you to be the bigger person, to turn the other cheek, and to keep the peace at all costs. But they never tell you exactly how much of your own soul you have to destroy just to keep that fake peace intact. I do not believe in keeping a toxic peace. I believe in fiercely protecting my peace. People often ask me if I have forgiven Beatrice and Chloe for what they tried to do. They ask if Marcus holds on to anger toward his mother for risking her home to protect a lying thief. The truth is, forgiveness is a deeply personal internal process. It is about releasing the heavy burden of resentment from your own heart so you do not have to carry that poison around with you every single day. I do not lie awake at night plotting revenge against them. I do not actively wish for their continued suffering. I have released them entirely to the consequences of their own miserable actions. In that sense, I have forgiven them. But forgiveness does not ever equal access. You can completely forgive a person from a distance while permanently locking the door to your life. Forgiveness does not mean I have to invite them back to my dinner table. It does not mean I have to subject my husband to his mother's constant emotional manipulation or allow my son to be treated like a second-class citizen ever again. Reconciling with toxic people is not a requirement for personal healing. In fact, sometimes cutting ties completely is the highest, most profound act of self-love you can possibly commit. I refuse to feel guilty for demanding basic respect. I refuse to apologize for prioritizing my immediate family over people who only saw us as walking bank accounts and emotional punching bags. Removing Beatrice, Chloe, and Trent from our lives was not an act of cruelty. It was an act of profound, necessary self-preservation. We excised a malignant tumor before it could spread and infect the beautiful, healthy life we had worked so incredibly hard to build. We left the amusement park late Sunday evening completely exhausted, but radiantly happy. Malik fell asleep in the back seat of our car. Before we even hit the highway, his head resting comfortably against the window and a soft, peaceful smile on his face. Marcus reached across the center console and gently took my hand. His fingers laced perfectly through mine, his grip steady and warm. We drove home in a comfortable, quiet silence, surrounded by the deep, rich wealth of our own making. We did not need a sprawling brick mansion in the suburbs to prove our worth to anyone. We had everything we could ever possibly need right there inside that car. Looking back on that quiet car ride home, I realize now that it was the beginning of a completely new chapter for my family. The transition was not magically easy overnight. When you cut ties with the family you were born into, there is a very real grieving process that follows. You do not just grieve the people you walked away from. You grieve the family you always wished you had. You mourn the supportive mother you never got to experience. You mourn the loving sisterhood that was stolen by jealousy and toxic competition. There were days in the beginning when the silence felt heavy. Society constantly tells women, especially Black women, that we are supposed to hold the family together at all costs. We are taught to be the strong ones, the peacemakers, the ones who swallow our pride, and endure the disrespect just to keep everyone under the same roof for a holiday dinner. But I am here to tell you that there is absolutely no honor in being the emotional shock absorber for abusive people. There is no prize waiting for you at the end of your life for enduring decades of mistreatment from your own blood. The strength of a woman does not lie in her ability to tolerate disrespect. True strength is having the courage to look at the people who gave you life and say that you demand better. True strength is looking at your child and deciding that the cycle of generational trauma officially ends with you. Often when a woman decides to walk away from her family, society rushes to label her as bitter or difficult. They assume that because you set a boundary, you must be the villain of the story. This is especially true for us. The concept of Black girl magic is so frequently tied to our career milestones, our financial success, and our ability to overcome massive systemic obstacles. We are praised when we build companies, when we buy homes, and when we achieve the impossible. But I want to redefine what that magic actually means. Black girl magic is not just about the boardrooms you conquer or the money you make. It is about the profound, radical act of protecting your own peace. It is the magic of looking at a broken system, even if that system is your own family, and deciding that you deserve absolute wholeness. It is the ability to heal the deep wounds you did not create so that your children never have to bleed from them. If you are watching this right now and you are struggling with a toxic family dynamic, I want you to listen to me very carefully. You are not a bad daughter for protecting your mental health. You are not a bad sister for refusing to fund someone else and their fake lifestyle. You are not a bad mother for removing your child from an environment that makes them feel small. You are simply a cycle breaker. And breaking cycles is incredibly exhausting, lonely work. But I promise you, the absolute peace waiting for you on the other side of that boundary is worth every single uncomfortable conversation. When Thanksgiving rolls around this year, my dining room table will not be filled with 50 people. There will be no passive-aggressive comments about the food I prepared. There will be no one bragging about fake jobs or demanding that my son hand over his gifts to appease someone else. My table will be much smaller. It will be just me, Marcus, Malik, and a few close friends who have become our chosen family. The people who sit at my table now are the people who celebrate my success without a single ounce of jealousy. They are the people who love my son for exactly who he is. Life is too short to sit at a table with people who measure your worth in receipts. For years I tried to buy my way into Beatrice and Chloe and their hearts. I baked the perfect pies, I bought the expensive gifts, I tried to be the perfect daughter-in-law, just to earn a tiny scrap of their validation. But you can never purchase the respect of people who are committed to misunderstanding you. Their love was always conditional, and their approval was always entirely out of stock. So I stopped trying to shop at an empty store. I cleared the table of my life, and the food has never tasted better. The air in my home is finally light. My marriage is stronger than it has ever been because my husband and I faced a massive storm and proved that we are an unbreakable team. And most importantly, my son is thriving. Malik is growing into a confident, kind, and incredibly secure young man who knows exactly what healthy love looks like. He will never have to spend his adult life recovering from his childhood because we did the hard work of protecting him right now. We built our own table, we set our own rules, and we permanently locked the door to anyone who refuses to bring genuine love and respect into our home. What about you? Have you ever had to stand up to protect your child from toxicity within your own family? Share your story in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories about healing and Black girl magic. See you next time.